And I suppose our first question for today is why are businesses in the Middle East region becoming more inclusive? And Zainab, if I can move to you first, have you seen this move towards greater inclusivity, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, absolutely. The trend has really been accelerating over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, but it's really gathered momentum in the last few years. I think there's a general acceptance of the importance of diversity and thought and backgrounds in all fields, in all sectors. It's especially important in a knowledge economy that we live in right now, and how companies can frankly become stronger. This is not just the right thing to do anymore. It is more about the bottom line. It's about having a diverse leadership and a diverse workforce that can contribute to challenging and facing the challenges of tomorrow. And we've definitely seen that accelerate here in the region. I think you've seen several examples of that, with UAE regional banks, for example, and other multinationals promoting from within their female talent to sort of more senior positions. We've seen a lot more C-suite appointments of talented females. The UAE and Saudi, especially, sort of leading the way in terms of accelerating that drive, really from the top. And we've seen that really from sort of multinationals that are operating in the region and being part of kind of global policies of sort of D&I initiatives, as well as more regional players. So absolutely, and I think there is, as I said, a realization that this is much more about driving a stronger and more resilient organization going forward.
Mm. Fantastic, thank you. And Shelley, and congratulations on 9 months pregnant. That's very exciting. Thank you for being with us today.
You don't see it because you see me talk.
No, amazing. And I'd be really interested in what evidence are you aware of for the benefits of a more inclusive working environment?
Maybe before I go to that, just to add to why, I think we have to acknowledge that the governments are driving a lot of this.
Right.
Like Saudi Arabia, you have to be at 30% by 2030, and for some companies that are starting at 0 to 5%, the journey is going to be a long one. And in the studies that we have done as BCG, the business case is so clear. So the governments are mandated, business case is clear, because we see that companies that are more diverse tend to be 20% more innovative or have EBIT that's about 10% more than peers. And in addition to that, because of that context, CEOs are championing diversity now. And as the CEOs and the C-suite start to come out and lead the change, then it trickles through the organization and we start seeing true change. So I think the momentum is there and we will keep the tide. How are we seeing it? I think we're seeing it in a number of different ways. And I was alluding to this in the introduction earlier. And I'll talk about maybe the two different styles that I see. We see what I consider to be more analogous to the Western style in some companies, where they're taking that very much core diversity approach in terms of integration of not only females, but people with disabilities, people of different backgrounds into the workforce. And they're doing that using different, I would say, initiatives across the employee value chain, whether it's using technology and AI for blind recruitment, sponsorship programs to ensure that people that actually get into the company have the right opportunity to move up and can fight unconscious and other biases that might be implicit in an environment like ours, where women have not been in the workforce. But interestingly, and what I quite like, is that companies have also recognized the culture of the region. And they've also recognized that as we bring women in, and as we tease, society to bring more women into the workforce, it's not going to be a sudden step change for everyone in terms of integration. So if I give you the examples of ADNOC and Pepsi, what they have done, for example, is have women-only facilities. So the Ruth Maya oil field is an example where they say, okay, we have to bring women in, and we wanted to do it quickly in a way that's culturally sensitive. So we have an oil field that is run by women. You saw the same thing with Pepsi in Saudi Arabia, where they have one of their snack producing facilities that is also all female. So I think we're seeing multiple different initiatives and approaches being used across the region to drive successful uptake in diversity within the companies.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and we'll talk a bit more as well about some of those initiatives, I hope. And Dana, for you in the banking world, have you seen that move towards greater inclusivity?
I mean, absolutely, Helen. I think not only in Saudi Arabia, but within the region as a whole. I think Abhishek would agree with me about Dubai as well, being very inclusive, type of environment that is currently within the banking sector in the Middle East in general. And I think that for Saudi, we've seen a lot of shifts in the past couple of years, I would say in the past 10 years, wherein, a lot of the population have been introduced to this new sector. This is the private sector that wasn't really utilized before. The ambition was to always join the government sector and work there for a job from, an 8 to 4 or let's say 7 to 3 for 30 years and then retire. This have changed drastically in the region, and I would maybe mention that I think that is partially because of how young the population is in the Middle East in general. You would see that there are lots of people who are being graduating every year, introduced to the workforce, introduced to the companies, and also having the opportunity to actually join these companies, whether it's within the banking sector, IT, and any other sector in the Middle East. I think that we are witnessing great times and great changes in the Middle East in the time being and in the very near future, and this is just going to head to more inclusive culture and more diverse culture as well within the working environment and outside as well. That is my personal belief. I might be very optimistic, but I do see these shifts, and I do see these trends every day since starting work. My career have started in 2012, and I remember that one of the first projects that we have initiated is introducing more female employees, or hiring more female employees through the graduate program into HP. So that was something that we have done for the Middle East altogether, and that's, I think, is something that is helping us as well to bring in more diverse population within the organization. I mean, for me currently in Citi and in Saudi Arabia especially, we do have about 45% of our staff, whether they are on a senior level, mid-management level, or junior level staff who are females, and that is something that we're quite proud about, even though we have a very small population, but we are growing, and certainly I believe we are growing in the right direction.
That's really interesting to hear, and I was your comment about the younger population coming through and presumably putting pressure on organizations to be more inclusive. Is that the experience? Yeah.
I would definitely say that, Helen, because with the new generation, there is just a different mindset. I don't think that the barriers that we used to have 20, 10, maybe 15 years ago exist in the new generation minds. They have new barriers, but I don't think inclusion or diversity is one of them.
That's really interesting. And then if we could move on and talk more specifically about some of the practical steps that organisations are taking. And Shelley, you've given us a couple of examples already. Are there others you can share that you see across the region?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few that companies employ. Maybe I talk about some that I feel passionately about that people should be taking on board, because I truly believe that a lot of the policies and initiatives that we need to support women in the workplace are actually gender neutral. So if we think about family care and the portfolio of family care initiatives that could be put in place, I think that's a big one. So when we look specifically at secondary caregiver time off, whether it's paternity leave or leave for families, I think that's an important one that some companies are beginning to take on board. I mean, here at BCG, we offer the new fathers 6 weeks of paid leave after their child has given birth. And what that does is, first of all, allow that person to focus on what's important at that time of life, but it also normalizes the playing field in the workplace a lot more. And this is not an anomaly in what we're seeing globally. You have some companies like Diageo that give up to 24 weeks secondary caregiver leave. You have like Facebook, I think they give 16 weeks. So I think thinking about, family related policies is an important one for us all to push and to champion within the organizations, because sometimes it's just as simple as having that sort of debate around the business case and retention that we're able to drive up significantly when we do things like this. So I think that in itself is a very important one. And now in this COVID or post-COVID world, flexible work is another important one. And we have companies within the region, like the Bank of Oman, that have, to some extent, had flexible work for a long time. They had been offering their employees an 8 to 10 fixed time, 8 to 2, and then everything around 8 to 2 was more flexible, where you are, how you work, or what you do. And I think what employees and parents and mothers and caregivers are appreciating is the flexibility to deliver quality work when it's needed, and it doesn't have to be in the typical 7 to 4 or 9 to 5 hours that we find ourselves working. So those are two examples I would say, but there are many others that I'm sure the panelists can talk through.
Thank you for that. And Dana, are there any particular initiatives you see being introduced in Saudi Arabia particularly?
Yeah, lots of initiatives, I'd say, Helen, as Shelley have mentioned, with the vision of 2030 that Saudi have had for the inclusion and diversity, and also with the fact that, as I've mentioned initially, there is a lot of shift within the mindset of people here, wherein people have started to accept, or families, let's say, because a lot of the decision-making process when it comes to your prospective employer, taking the job or not, is built on culture, I'd say, in the region, especially in Saudi Arabia, and built on the family kind of, perspective around, is that acceptable or not, or if, is this is a good, working environment for me, would my family agree or not? And I think that all of that is being is changing in a way that we have not or believed that it might change that fast, and I think that currently the cultural acceptance of a woman behind the wheel, similar to a woman who's working, is greatly enhanced, and it have changed drastically within the previous 5 years. That's just a very short period of time to change a whole population mindset. And I'd say that this to a bigger extent have happened in Saudi, which is a greater testimony to how flexible people would be once you give them the chance to actually follow these changes and choose for themselves what is better serving them in the future.
And just to add maybe to what Dana is saying, I think what's interesting about Saudi, because I've been working in Saudi now for I think maybe 9 years and have seen this tidal wave of transformation, is that we have the benefit that the business world is changing at light speed. So when we look at digital and sustainability, we need new capabilities and new talent that just did not exist before. So it has become quite an opening for where educated, qualified, young talent, or talent that's willing to reskill themselves of diverse backgrounds, have been able to enter the workforce. So I can tell you that I walk into cybersecurity teams that are almost 50%, if not more than 50% women, because companies have realized that as they recruit and train, it can be a good conduit for women overall. So I think as we begin to think about new business trajectories and new talent, that in itself becomes a great pull. And Saudi Arabia has just been fantastic at sort of recognizing that, and even having, you know, the NTCs and the training academies that are female focused, that train those females, and in that, let's say, transition period that Anna is talking about, when their families are getting accustomed, and then bring them into that mixed workforce.
Okay. And Zainab, if I can bring you in, are there any particular initiatives that have been introduced in Invesco or other things that you see?
Yeah, I think Shelley and Donna both touched on this in terms of parental leave and the importance of that in leveling the playing field. And we're extremely proud at Invesco to have introduced last year, in the middle of COVID, a new parental leave policy that is equal for both mothers and fathers to take up to 6 months of parental leave, fully paid, 100% of salary, to spend time with their families, and that includes both maternity for mothers, obviously, and paternity for fathers. And we're really proud of that, because I think that really does go some way to equalizing that stigma, I guess. You know, a lot of people talk about the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood premium, for example, and we're really looking to address that issue head on. I think we're going to talk about some challenges later, but I think for us, you know, that's one really important initiative. A few other things, you know, in kind of attracting and promoting rising talent is the use of blind CVs, for example, making sure that you know, trying to tackle that unconscious bias that we all have, and that's a factor of our conditioning of society, but really trying to make sure that we look at CVs when we're recruiting in a very neutral way. Also looking at wording in our job descriptions, for example, really you know, analyzing that to ensure that we don't preclude females and other diverse candidates from applying because of how we're framing certain jobs, or again, around flexibility. We're undertaking unconscious bias training and psychological safety training to ensure that all views are heard, and making sure that you know, women's views are elevated and women's profiles are elevated. We have a successful internal women's mentoring program that has been going for a few years now, and that's been very successful in, again, providing access to quite senior sort of men and women mentors within Invesco, and promoting some of those role models from within. So quite a bit going on, and we're really proud of our D&I initiatives in Invesco.
Yeah. Can I ask around the parental leave policy? Has there had to be a culture shift in the organisation for the men to take up their entitlement, as it were, or how is that played out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It is a relatively new policy. So there's still a little bit of a stigma. I have to be honest about men or fathers sort of taking up that sort of full entitlement, if you like. And you know, Shelley will know about this in a few weeks. But you know, there is a limited role, I guess, for fathers in the first few weeks of a baby's life, right? So it's a bit like, oh well, what can I really do as a father? So we made it quite flexible, so they can take up that 6 months allowance up to a year after the birth of their child. So it's not like they have to take it straight away after the birth of their child. It can be, you know, a few months later, as and when they decide it's more relevant for them as a family. And I think it's been very you know, well received widely, obviously by women, but by men in general. And the next generation of men will hopefully see a lot more take up.
Yeah,
it's interesting hearing Zainab's response, because at BCG it's been, I would say, quite the opposite. We were so surprised by how men embraced, and maybe it's because it's we offer a short period, and maybe, so it could be different. But all of the men that had the opportunity to take the parental policy would take it. Sometimes they shifted it, like what Dana said, so they They would do it when they felt they could be a little bit more useful at home. So maybe 3 months in or 6 months in, or just at the juncture when their wife was going back to work, they would then, cross that period over. But I haven't looked at the numbers, but I would presume that over 90% of the people that have had it available to them have been using it. And interestingly, we've seen the same thing with flex policy that we provide, which is not prenatal related, but we say, okay, you have the option to take up to 2 months off, I think every year or 2 years, I can't remember right now. And more men have been taking that up than women. So to some extent, and that then, sets a different dynamic when it comes to people stepping out and back into the workforce.
And I would think in those scenarios, it needs some of your senior men, some of your male leaders to take the lead on it as well, to show that it's an okay thing to do.
Yes, definitely. And I think having senior leaders do it, but also easing the integration in and out, right? And especially for certain types of roles, allowing people to know that their space, their platform is, very clear and very comfortable, and championing it and pushing it and showing that it has no impact on your performance, let's say review or assessment. I think all of those things have been important to the success of the program overall.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a relatively new program for us. As I said, it's introduced towards the latter half of last year. So we're really hoping that as things progress, we will see a lot more take up. And to Shelley's point, we are, in addition to that parental leave policy, we're also providing coaching when people do return to work in terms of how they're sort of juggling family life, and that's obviously open to both men and women.
Interesting. Yeah. It'd be great to hear how that develops, and it'll be such a good attraction tool for talent as well, won't it? Because people will really value that. Thank you. And moving on now to, I feel we're on a bit of a high with all that, but I was going to ask you about challenges, so bringing things down perhaps a little bit. I mean, Dana, you've been really optimistic about everything, but are there particular challenges that you experience? Oh, you're on mute at the moment, Dana. Dana, you're on mute. No worries.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So Helen, I was just saying that I was definitely not optimistic about everything, because we know firsthand the hurdles that might accompany all of this shift and all of these changes, as Zainab have mentioned, the introduction of an enhanced parental leave, whether it's the maternity or the paternity leave, and that's something that we are seeing as well in Saudi Arabia, where recently the maternity leave period have increased. Of course, we are above that threshold within city, but the threshold for the maternity leave have increased, and with that there would be a lot of pushback, obviously, because we do practice change management for a reason, and that's exactly, I think, is when it's needed. When you are changing the rules, even if it seems positive or something that is in the benefit of the recipients, people would still be hesitant to accept it because of what Shelley and Zainab have highlighted. There are so many cultural, limitations wherein sometimes people would get stuck in that mindset and wouldn't see beyond it, even if it's something that might be beneficial for them and therefore and for their work-life balance. So a lot of push and a lot of resistance. We recently have also introduced a new guidelines, including the parental leave, and there was some push from some of our senior management. So the solution for that is really to sit down on a round table or on Skype or Zoom or whatever, and just discuss openly what are the limitations and why would you believe that this is something that wouldn't work, and just negotiate the best solution. I think an open conversation is always a good way to go, to combat or to kind of face these resistances and these challenges. But in that context, we will always have challenges, and we will always have, even when we reach a goal that we are setting for ourselves, such as diversity, more inclusion, all of that. Believe me, Helen, we will reach another challenge that we would need to combat, and that's something that is just within the nature of the constant change that we are seeing around the world, not only in the Middle East, and the shift between like innovation that used to happen in the first world countries and is now moving, I think, rapidly toward Asia. Third world countries are experiencing that. So I think that because change is the only constant thing and the only fixed fact, we will continue to experience changes, and with it we will continue to experience more challenges that we need to overcome.
Yeah. And Zainab, any particular challenges that you see at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on a couple a few moments ago around sort of the take-up of, say, an equal parental leave policy and the stigma around sort of men or fathers kind of taking up that. That is unfortunately as we see it right now. But as I said, I am encouraged by the next generation of fathers, the millennials especially, who do want to take a more active role in their families and other caring responsibilities. I think the other few challenges are a couple. One is, we may be doing well at, accessing or advancing kind of our female talent at sort of, they say, a fresh graduate level or an entry level, but it's that funnel that we still struggle to kind of promote to kind of more senior level positions, and that leads to a lack of role models, right? Coupled with all the dynamics around, a woman's sort of peak career potential is combined with when they want to start a family, that adds further complications. So things like, the kind of mentoring program that I spoke about, and having more kind of access, more direct access to senior people would help. I think the other one, and we've tried to tackle this in Invesco too, is really instituting some D&I KPIs within senior managers' own objectives. So their objectives are not just purely based on commercial outcomes, but some D&I sort of KPIs as well. But it's all very well to put that in if the mindset doesn't change from the top, and if that message doesn't come from the top and institute that culture, then it becomes very difficult to execute at every level. So that's not the case in Invesco, but I have seen that with other multinationals and other sort of regional players as well, where there is still some way to go. So these are just some of my thoughts.
Yeah. And Shelley, do you see particular challenges in the Middle East region compared to some of the other parts of the world where you've worked before?
So definitely yes, and I'd like to start by maybe underscoring Zainab's last point, which is around change management, and coming back to this point of the need. One of the challenges that I see is that senior leaders are not consistently enough communicating the importance of diversity and inclusion. So it becomes, to some extent, once, twice a year. What we've seen at BCG, and I was alluding to this before, is that when a CEO is consistently championing diversity, 90% of the men in his company tend to recognize that as important. If he's not consistent in his communication, that number falls from 90% to approximately 40%. So it's such a huge gap and quite telling about the need to have that championship. So the first challenge I'd highlight is the need for more consistent championship, more consistent visual championship of the topic. It's to the point of paternal policies. it's not just having it there, and as you were alluding to, Helen, but it's having it there and championing it. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, which we know is in the region, but I just have to call it out, is that we're starting structurally with we're starting behind the start line, because for a long time, women were just not allowed to work in certain jobs. And Dana would know this in Saudi Arabia, right? When it comes to power generation, when it comes to distribution, a lot of sort of, on-site technical jobs, when it comes to working from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., there were so many restrictions that were placed on women that did not allow them to have the opportunity to build up the experience over the last decades. So there is somehow a shortage of talent that we can inject at the middle and the leadership levels. And hopefully that in itself is changing right now, and we can think of ways to accelerate it. So that's the challenge. And I think coupled with that challenge is the fact that we're not bold enough in some of our companies in the Middle East to say, okay, I'm going to do accelerated development of programs for diverse groups. And like we've seen at companies like Shell, for example, where they've been very clear, we want to have equal women on panels, or when we have 2 people for a job, we recognize we have to build up diverse talent at the top. Once they're both equally qualified, then we select the diverse talent. Like, some companies that I've worked with internationally have been much more aggressive than what I see within the Middle East region. And I think maybe the final thing that I'll say around this is we don't spend enough time in the region recognizing or customizing for how we deal with unconscious bias, so the individual biases, and the intersection of that bias with the cultural context. So we know, for example, that sponsorship programs can be tremendously useful for helping women figure out how to navigate their careers and to move up the ladder to find opportunities. But I've sat in, boardrooms or executive meetings where actually senior men from the Middle East have said, look, it's just uncomfortable for me to be alone with a female, or what would be the perception be if I were championing this young female? But we tend to shy away from those topics when we're planning and in these initiatives. Like, we don't plan enough for the cultural context, I will say, is one of the final key challenge that I would like to highlight.
Yeah, and I suppose that's so historically part of the fabric that it takes a lot to shift that.
I think I would say it takes a lot to shift the behaviors, but it does not take a lot to put the structure in place and catalyze that behavioral change. It just requires that as leaders and as seniors in HR and the people agenda, that we are more deliberate about how we do that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to move on to my final question, which is going to be the same to all 3 of you, which is, what gives you encouragement as you look to the future? And Shelley, let me come to you first. What gives you encouragement?
It's the young workforce, I believe, because I think that there is this huge, let's say, energy and cultural shift when it comes to diversity and to embracing diversity overall. And this is not about gender diversity. It's about embracing different ways of thinking, different cultures, different age groups, different disabilities, and recognizing that everyone can contribute. And I think that is really, for me, the silver lining is I believe that there will be a wave of change that can happen overall. And that for me leaves me very, very hopeful, coupled with the fact that the momentum is there, right? Like, we're seeing, and if governments continue, and the UAE is a great example, to stay, I don't want to use the word rigid, committed to the aspirations that they have in place for diversity, there is no doubt that the change will happen. And once there is a goal for people to work towards, once you're tracking that goal, we will move there. And I feel like at least the countries that I work in the GCC, that the governments have been quite committed to that. So I think the energy of the young workforce, the commitment of the government, that intersection is going to help us maybe even leapfrog other countries in the next decade.
Mm. And Zainab, what do you think?
It is all about ESG for me. I'm extremely excited by that trend. So environmental, social governance factors have really come to the fore. I'm in the investment world, so we've seen that over the last 10 years, and probably the climate change aspect is what you've most heard about. But I think post-COVID, post Black Lives Matter, post Me Too, the S has really, really come to the forefront of people's minds. And that really includes diversity and inclusion at the heart of it. And we've really seen sort of a lot of rhetoric, but beyond rhetoric, a lot of execution around, kind of companies' own CSR policies, but also in order to attract capital, they've got to be seen to demonstrate. And they do have some robust policies in place to do that. And, capital flow is the driving force behind that. So I'm very excited by that. I think now it's all about execution, though. So it's beyond policies. This is the challenge, I think, for all of us going forward. But the fact that it's ESG has become sort of not just a nice to have in a lot of investors' minds, but it's a prerequisite. Gives me a lot of optimism and bright spots for the future.
Thank you. And Dana, where do you see the encouragement?
Well, as you've mentioned, Helen, I am very optimistic when it comes to the future. I believe in change. I am very excited still whenever we have a new wave of graduates to hire and people to onboard who are newly introduced to the workforce. I think that this is what's driving the future, in addition to what's, for me, for my country, for Saudi Arabia, what's being emphasized, what's being changed, what's being implemented as well, including the future vision of 2030. This is something to look forward to. I have, maybe when I was studying at school, when I was in high school, I've never dreamt of a future that looked this bright in Saudi, and that's what I am mostly interested to. Of course, there is a lot to work with, a lot of resistance, a lot of challenges, and with it, a lot of change to come. So that is something that I am definitely looking forward to. I believe that what's coming is better than what have passed, and that's what I see now visualizing, even in such a difficult time of COVID-19 and all of its implications. I still see that the change that is happening is generally positive. There are a lot of negative aspects, but the general outcome that we are going to get out of is going to be positive for the region, for Saudi, and for the whole of humanity, hopefully.
Very good. And Dana, that whole COVID-19 scenario, did that set things back at all, or has it just made everything far more focused on what's important?
I would say, Helen, in the beginning, yes, there was a lot of setbacks. There were lots of challenges. Most of the organizations here in Saudi did not believe in teleworking, so they did not have the right implementation for people to work from home. So let me talk about some of the semi-government entities that we were trying to reach out, for example, to during the beginning of the pandemic. We couldn't, because their employees were at home, not being able to connect to the company's network. So I would say that was an eye-opening to the Saudi government when it comes to its semi-government sectors, when it comes to its government entities, and that's something that have enforced more the importance of having the right connectivity, enabling teleworking, enabling your employee to be able to work even in such difficult circumstances wherein they cannot come to the office. So a lot of setbacks in the beginning, but now it's becoming a daily routine. routine for us to just wake up and, for some of you, maybe sit for a bit with your kids or make breakfast and so on. For me, it's just jumping right into work and just opening your laptop, your PC, whatever, at home in your own home office and work from there. We are now getting used to this situation wherein I come to the office a couple of days a week, and I do find it a bit different, and with it we will have more challenges coming back to work. I think with maybe the social anxiety that would happen afterwards, because people are used to telecommunicate and telework for I'd say a year now. So setbacks, lots of setbacks, but also lots of opportunities and lots of lessons.
Thank you.
I'm going to be slightly cheeky here and maybe turn the tables slightly at Sheffield Howard and Abhishek in particular, given that you're a Middle East sort of based, given that you have sight of so many different industries and obviously employers, firsthand and how their sort of employment practices. It would be great to hear from you or Helen about how you're seeing sort of any challenges and any bright spots and trends in Vietnam.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about it briefly. In the Middle East, I agree with all the points highlighted by the panel. But in the Middle East, we are seeing a lot of push on the diversity side. There was a time when from the diversity was only related to the language skills. Telling you from the recruitment point of view, I can tell you from my 6 years experience in the Middle East. There was the only diversity angle in a job description used to be a language skill set that the organization were looking for. But today, to give you an example of Saudi Aramco Pension Fund. So Saudi Aramco Pension Fund primarily always have been dominated by the male employees in the organization. But ever since Sheer Al-Ruwaili has joined right at the top as the CEO, in their last, so some of us will understand this, that in Saudi Arabia, any organization looking to hire expats needs to apply for the visas. So this time, when with SAIA, the Saudi Aramco Pension Fund, when they've applied for their visas, they have categorically asked out of 15, 5 visas for the female employees. So this is how the diversity inclusion has been taken care in some of the organizations. So it's very clear now that out of those 15 individuals that they want to hire in a span of 10 to 15 months, 5 has to be female candidates, and that's a directive given to us as well as we go out and look for candidates for them. Similarly, in various different organizations, be it in the pension funds, local banks here in the region, international banks, asset management. Zainab, you are a great example of that. A role which has always been dominated by mostly males, the asset management, private equity sales. You have been building a team which is full of diversity, particularly on the gender equality point. So yeah, that's from my side. Helen, if you have a point.
Yeah, I think we see a general push across all the regions where we work, which are all the main kind of financial centres that you'd expect. There are some variations in different regions, but I think we see a lot of organisations feeling that they've done a fair bit on gender. It's by no means done, but they've made progress, and now it's those perhaps some more challenging as to how to really make systematic differences, particularly around wider ethnicity representation, bringing disabled people into the workforce, particularly much more around LGBTQ rights. So we're seeing a lot of diversity, which I think makes sense. Thank you all so much. I'm aware of time and that we need to probably tie things up now, but really appreciate all your contributions and some really great examples of things going on in the region, and also to hear your optimism about the change. It's going to be so exciting to see what happens, and I think with people like the three of you committed to it, it will definitely progress. And Abhishek, let me hand back over to you to finish things off.
Yeah, sure. I would like to just thank each one of you for taking time out today to attend this webinar. We will be sending the recordings of this event to all the attendees. And I think, the panel members are also comfortable, taking invitations on LinkedIn from anyone who would like to contact and, discuss this any further. We will look forward to, arranging a similar webinar, sometime soon, maybe towards the end of this year, Helen.
Love to. Sounds great. Yeah.
Perfect.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.